young nurse comforts a lonely old man, and the next day, 50 doctors show up at her house. Before we begin, take a moment to tell us in the comments what simple act of kindness you've witnessed recently that restored your faith in humanity. The last light bulb in the hallway flickered, a frantic, dying heartbeat that mirrored the one in Alara's own chest. It cast long, dancing shadows across the peeling floral wallpaper, making the cramped space of her little rented house feel like a closing fist. Outside, the wind howled a mournful prelude to the coming blizzard, rattling the ill-fitting window frames. Each gust was a cold whisper of what was to come, not just from the sky, but from the world itself. On the small kitchen table, a stack of envelopes lay like a funeral pyre for her hopes. Final notice, past due, eviction warning. The words were stark and merciless in the sputtering light. Alara sank into a rickety wooden chair, her body aching with a fatigue that went far beyond the double shift she had just finished at the county hospital. It was a weariness of the soul. A year had passed since David, her husband, her brilliant, laughing David, had been taken from her in a senseless crash. He had been a doctor, full of plans to open a clinic for the underserved. Now all that was left of his dream were his textbooks, stacked neatly in a corner, and the crushing weight of the life they were supposed to build together. His small life insurance policy had evaporated under a mountain of his student debt and the cost of living in a town that had never fully welcomed her. Now, there was only the cold, the coming storm, and the final humiliating threat from her landlord, Mr. Silas. The rent was 3 months late. He had given her until tomorrow. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache that she ignored. There was a can of beans in the cupboard and half a loaf of stale bread. It would have to do. As she stared at the eviction notice, its cruel, blocky letters swimming before her tired eyes, the phone rang. The sound was a shrill intrusion into her quiet desperation. She almost didn't answer. It could be another debt collector, another voice dripping with false sympathy before delivering a threat. But her training as a nurse was too ingrained. A ringing phone might mean an emergency. She picked it up. Alara? It was Martha, the night shift supervisor at the hospital. I know you're off, honey, and Lord knows you need the rest, but we've got a situation. Alara's shoulders slumped. What is it, Martha? It's that old man in room 302, Arthur. He's refusing his medication, won't eat, and he's been a terror to the junior staff. He ripped out his 4 twice. He keeps asking for the nurse with the kind eyes. That's you, sweetie. No one else can get near him. I wouldn't ask, but he's fragile, and with this storm rolling in, I'm worried he'll code out of sheer stubbornness. Alara closed her eyes. It was an unpaid visit. A favor. It would take hours she didn't have, hours she desperately needed to try and call a legal aid society or a charity or anyone who might stop the inevitable eviction. Every rational instinct screamed for her to say no. Survival demanded it. She had to take care of herself. No one else was going to. She thought of the beans in the cupboard, of the sleeping bag she'd have to use when Silas threw her things onto the frozen lawn. She had to be selfish just this once. But then, she pictured the old man, alone in a sterile hospital room, lashing out from a place of fear and loneliness she understood all too well. No one should be alone, David used to say, especially when they're scared. Her own profound loneliness echoed in the silence of her house. Her integrity, the very core of her being shaped by David's memory and her own innate compassion, refused to let her turn away. The cost was too high, but the cost of abandoning her principles felt even higher. It would be like losing David all over again. I'll be there, she whispered, the words tasting like sacrifice and resignation. Tell him I'm on my way. Before she left, she did something that made no logical sense. She opened her last can of beans, heated them with the remaining bread, and poured the simple meal into a thermos. It was her dinner, her only dinner, but the thought of Arthur refusing his hospital tray made her own hunger seem trivial. She wrapped the thermos in a threadbare towel to keep it warm, pulled on her thin coat, and stepped out into the biting wind, the flickering light in her hallway finally giving up and plunging the house into darkness behind her. The hospital was an island of harsh, fluorescent light against the churning gray sky. Room 302 was quiet when she entered. The old man, Arthur, was huddled under a thin blanket, his back to the door. He was a small, frail man with a corona of unruly white hair and hands gnarled with age. His room was devoid of any personal effects. No cards, no flowers, no photographs. It was the room of a man the world had forgotten. "Arthur?" she said softly. He turned, and his eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, fixed on her. They were filled with suspicion and a deep, ancient sadness. "They said you would come," he grumbled, his voice a dry rasp. "Took you long enough." Alara offered a small, tired smile. She didn't react to his gruffness. She saw the fear beneath it. "I had to make a stop first," she said, placing the thermos on his bedside table. "I heard you weren't eating. I can't say I blame you. Hospital food tastes like cardboard. I brought you some bean and bacon soup. My husband's favorite." She didn't mention it was all she had. He eyed the thermos warily. "Why?" "Because Martha said you were giving everyone a hard time, and I figured a man that stubborn must have a reason. And usually that reason is hunger or fear. I can't do much about the fear, but I can help with the hunger." She gently took his arm, her touch practiced and kind, and examined the angry red mark where he'd pulled out his fore. His skin was like paper. As she cleaned the area and applied a fresh dressing, he watched her every move. He saw the faint tremor of exhaustion in her hands, the dark circles under her eyes, the worn collar of her uniform. He saw her wedding band, a simple gold ring she refused to take off. "You're tired," he stated. It wasn't a question. "A little," she admitted. "Long week." He finally gestured toward the thermos. "Dish it out, then. Let's see if it's any good." She poured the soup into a cup, and he ate, slowly at first, then with a surprising appetite. They sat in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the clinking of the spoon and the rising scream of the wind outside. When he was finished, a little bit of color had returned to his cheeks. "You lost him, didn't you?" Arthur asked, his gaze fixed on her ring. "Your husband." Alara's breath caught. "Yes," she managed to say. "A year ago." "You have his eyes," Arthur said, a strange intensity in his voice. "Not the color. The look. Like you're seeing the person, not the patient." He paused, his sharp eyes seeming to pierce right through her. "Why did you really come here tonight, Alara? You're not on the clock. You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. Why waste your time on a useless old man?" The question was a test, and she knew it. She looked at him, at the profound loneliness that clung to him like a shroud, and she gave him the only honest answer she had. Because no one should have to face a storm alone. A flicker of something, respect, understanding, passed through his gaze. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that sealed a bond between them. It was nearly midnight when she returned home. The storm had broken with full fury, driving sheets of sleet against the house. The darkness inside was absolute. As she fumbled for the door, her fingers numb with cold, they brushed against a piece of paper nailed to the wood. It was stiff with ice. She tore it free and, using the faint light from her phone, read the words that shattered her last sliver of hope. It was a formal notice from Mr. Silas's lawyer. "Pursuant to your failure to remit payment, eviction proceedings will commence tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. All possessions must be removed from the property by that time." 24 hours had become 9. The finality of it was a physical blow. She stumbled inside, the cold of the house seeping into her bones. Her act of kindness, her small defiance against the cruelty of the world, had cost her the roof over her head. The warmth of the soup she had given away was a bitter memory now, a symbol of her own foolish, self-destructive compassion. She sank to the floor in the dark, empty house and finally allowed the tears to come, silent and hot against her frozen cheeks. The dawn broke gray and unforgiving. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world entombed in white. The silence was heavy, broken only by the drip of water from the leaking roof into a pot on the floor. A slow, steady clock ticking down her final hours in this house. Alara moved like a phantom, packing her meager life into cardboard boxes. Each item was a memory: David's favorite sweater, the chipped mug he drank his coffee from, the worn copy of Leaves of Grass he used to read to her. She paused, holding a framed photograph of them on their wedding day, both of them beaming, so young, so unaware of the fragility of their joy. Wiping a tear from the glass, she remembered something David had told her about his time in medical school. He spoke with such reverence of his mentor, a brilliant but reclusive surgeon named Dr. Alistair Finch. He was a legend, a man who had revolutionized cardiac procedures, but had vanished from public life after his own wife passed away. David had called him a true healer, someone who understood that medicine was about more than just science. Lost in the memory, Alara picked up one of David's old medical journals, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it, and on the inside cover, in David's familiar, hurried script, was a dedication she'd never seen before. For Dr. Finch, it read, "Thank you for teaching me that a doctor's first duty is not to the chart, but to the soul. I hope to make you proud." A wave of sorrow washed over her. She never got to meet the man who had shaped her husband. The thought was just another small sadness in an ocean of loss. She carefully placed the journal and the photograph in a box, a small archive of a life that was now being dismantled. A loud, aggressive knock on the door made her jump. It was only 8:30. He was early. She opened the door to find Mr. Silas standing on the porch, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his thin lips. He was flanked by two large men who looked like they enjoyed their work. "Morning, Alara," Silas said, his voice slick with false politeness. "Time's up. As you can see, I've brought help to expedite your departure." "You said 9 o'clock, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm a busy man. Let's not drag this out." He pushed past her into the house, his wet boots soiling the floor. "A shame," he said, surveying her packed boxes with a dismissive glance. "Your husband, the big-shot doctor, didn't leave you much, did he? All that education, for nothing." The personal cruelty of the remark struck her harder than the eviction itself. She bit her lip to keep from responding, her dignity the only thing she had left. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Just let me get my husband's things," she pleaded softly. "Please don't let your men break them." Silas laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You should have thought of that when you were spending your rent money. Start moving the boxes out," he ordered his men. "Toss them on the curb." As one of the men roughly grabbed the box containing David's photo and journal, Alara felt a surge of desperate strength. "No!" she cried, lunging for it. "Not that one." The man simply shoved her aside, and she stumbled back, landing hard on the floor. Humiliation and despair washed over her. It was over. She had lost everything. The world was just as cold and merciless as she had feared. But as the man stepped onto the porch, ready to hurl the box into the slushy snow, a voice, calm and full of unquestionable authority, cut through the morning air. "I would advise you to put that box down. Very carefully." The world seemed to hold its breath. Down the quiet, snow-covered street, a silent procession of sleek, black cars was pulling to the curb. They moved with an unnerving, coordinated grace, their dark polish gleaming against the white snow. Doors opened in unison, and from them emerged dozens of men and women. They were dressed in immaculate suits and crisp, white coats, their faces serious and intelligent. They moved together, an army of purpose, and at their head, walking with a vigor that belied his age, was Arthur. He was transformed. Gone was the frail, frightened patient. In his place stood a man of immense presence, dressed in a perfectly tailored cashmere coat. His sharp blue eyes, no longer clouded with loneliness, now glinted with cold, righteous anger. He walked directly up the path, his gaze fixed on Alara, who was still on the floor. He ignored Silas completely. One of the women, a doctor with kind eyes, rushed to Alara's side, helping her to her feet. "Are you all right, my dear?" Arthur asked, his voice now rich and resonant. Alara could only nod, speechless, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible scene unfolding before her. Arthur finally turned his attention to Silas, who was gaping, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "Mr. Silas, I presume?" Arthur said, his tone dangerously soft. Who the hell are you?" Silas stammered. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch," he said, and a quiet gasp rippled through the neighbors who had begun to gather on their porches, drawn by the commotion. "And you, sir, are trespassing." One of the men in a suit, a lawyer, stepped forward holding a tablet. "Mr. Silas," the lawyer said crisply, "as of 8:15 this morning, the Finch Medical Foundation acquired this property and, in fact, this entire block. Your eviction notice is void. Your business here is concluded. Any further attempt to harass Ms. Reyes will be met with the full force of the law." Silas's jaw dropped. His face turned a pasty white. "The Finch. You can't." "Oh, I can," Dr. Finch said, his voice like ice. "Furthermore, my legal team will be conducting a thorough investigation into your rental practices. I have a feeling we'll find a great deal to discuss with the State Attorney General." He dismissed Silas with a flick of his hand, and the two large men, now looking terrified, practically dragged their former employer back to his truck and sped away. The street was silent for a moment. Then, Dr. Finch turned back to Alara, his expression softening into one of profound warmth. "I apologize for the dramatics," he said, "and for my deception at the hospital. It's a test I run sometimes in the institutions my foundation supports. A way to see the truth of a place. To find the people who act not for reward, but from character." He took her hands in his. "You, my dear, have more character than anyone I have met in a very long time. You shared your last meal with a stranger. You showed kindness to a lonely old man. You did it when you had nothing, and expected nothing in return." He paused, his eyes misting over. "Last night you mentioned your husband, David Reyes. It wasn't until I was leaving that I made the connection. David was more than a student to me. He was like a son. He was the brightest, most compassionate young doctor I had ever had the privilege to mentor. After my wife died, I withdrew from the world. I lost touch with so many. It is the greatest regret of my life that I didn't know of his passing, that I wasn't there for him or for you." He gestured to the crowd of doctors behind him. "These are my children, my grandchildren, and the senior fellows of my foundation. They are David's colleagues. They are your family now." The crowd of neighbors watched, their earlier judgment and suspicion melting away into awe. They saw Alara not as the struggling outsider, but as a woman of quiet heroism, being honored by a legion of the country's finest medical minds. Mr. Silas's whispered lies about her were exposed for what they were, and a wave of collective shame and respect washed over the small community. Dr. Finch turned to Alara, his voice thick with emotion. "This house is yours now, Alara. The mortgage is paid. My foundation will handle all repairs. But that is just the beginning." He held up the journal his associate had retrieved from the box. "David wrote that he wanted to make me proud. He did. Now it's our turn to make him proud. We are establishing a new community outreach program in this town, in his name. The Dr. David Reyes Memorial Clinic. And we want you to run it. Furthermore, the foundation is offering you a full, unconditional scholarship to complete your medical degree at any university you choose. You will not want for anything." Overwhelmed, Alara could only whisper, "Why?" Dr. Finch smiled, a true, brilliant smile that reached his eyes. "Because you passed the test, Alara. You reminded an old man, and all of us, what medicine, what humanity is truly about. It is not about the chart. It is about the soul." One by one, the doctors came forward, introducing themselves, shaking her hand, welcoming her. The cold, empty house began to fill with people, with warmth, with the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. Her found family had arrived. A year later, the little house was no longer peeling and sad. It was a jewel, with a new roof, bright paint, and a garden bursting with flowers. It was a beacon of warmth and light on a street that had been transformed. Down the road, the Dr. David Reyes Community Clinic was a bustling hub of hope, offering the best care to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. The whole town had changed, its heart softened by the clinic's presence and by the quiet, powerful example of the woman who ran it while she aced her classes at the state's top medical school. Alara stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and gold. Dr. Finch, now a beloved grandfather figure in her life, sat beside her in a rocking chair. They watched the neighborhood children playing in a new park, built where Silas's ugly, predatory office once stood. The world was no longer a cold, threatening place. It was a place of possibility, of connection, of profound and unexpected grace. A single, selfless act, a cup of soup offered in the dark, had not just saved her. It had rippled outward, healing a community, honoring a memory, and building a future brighter than she could have ever dreamed. It proved that, in the final accounting of a life, compassion is the only currency that truly matters, and its dividends can be infinite. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest act of goodness can change the world.